some resources, recommendations. So if we get started with what ADHD is, sorry, let me just get my next slide up. Okay, so for anybody who doesn't know, the DSM is the Diagnostic and Statistic Manual of mental illness, and it's really lots of people refer to it as the Bible of psychiatric diagnosis. It's based on a whole bunch of research and a whole bunch of people sitting around and talking about what they want to or how they want to categorize these things. And most importantly for us, it is usually what the medical aids require, something out of the DSM or the ICD. So let's just go through the symptoms. So what is required for a diagnosis of ADHD is more than 5 symptoms per category in adults, lasting for longer than 6 months. What is required for a diagnosis of ADHD is that the age of onset is less than or before the age of 12. And what's very interesting is that there has now been a lot of cases of people who are diagnosed before age 12 and then grow out of their ADHD, and also other people who are only diagnosed with ADHD as adults. And sometimes there isn't evidence of those symptoms occurring before the age of 12. And what that tells us immediately is that there is still a lot of understanding that needs to happen. Another really important part of this diagnostic criteria is the impact on social, academic, or occupational functioning. And I think especially in the world that we're living in right now, a lot of people can struggle with attention deficits. A lot of people struggle with restlessness at different stages of their lives. Maybe there's a more stressful part of your life. Maybe there's a more boring part of your life in which attention is starting to feel a little bit stretched. The research is showing that our attention capabilities might be reducing when it comes to things like social media, advertising, AI, all of those things. It seems as if our attention capacities might be getting weaker. And to me, that feels logical. It feels like if we're not exercising the muscles of attention in the same way that people did when they only had, for example, books, I think we can definitely expect that there will be some effect on our ability to attend to things and concentrate. So lots of people might experience symptoms of ADHD. Sometimes a lot of people might experience traits, but it is only considered a disorder when we start seeing this impact on the social, academic, or occupational functioning. And for people with the true disorder, for people who are really struggling with the way in which their attention is shaping how they see the world, what we see is that for those people, there is pervasive emotional dysregulation. It's not just a little bit of frustration that you can't concentrate on something that you want to concentrate on. It is severe and painful emotional ups and downs that sometimes feel within control, sometimes don't feel within control at all. A lot of people with ADHD struggle with severe anxiety. A lot of people with ADHD struggle with indecisiveness that feels paralyzing, with the kind of chronic fatigue that comes from a brain that is, I heard a description by an ADHD researcher, a race car brain with bicycle brakes, and that can cause chronic fatigue. People with ADHD can experience depression, other learning challenges. They can resort to substance abuse. And the reason why I want to highlight this is because we are most likely going to be talking about an ADHD spectrum in the years to come that all people fit on the spectrum, and some people experience few symptoms of attention deficits, and some people experience severe and pervasive symptoms. So when you're thinking about how you fit onto the spectrum, my recommendation is to be flexible with yourself. Don't attach to thinking that you sit anywhere specifically. These symptoms will change, and they will move with you. Importantly, ADHD has absolutely nothing to do with intelligence. Those are different things. And what we know is that around about 1 in 10 children are being diagnosed with ADHD at the moment. That's a lot of kids. And I think it really points to how we need to take this seriously and understand that this is a large proportion of children and also adults. So let's go through some of the symptoms here. Usually with a diagnosis of ADHD, there might be, you might either fit into the inattention category, you might fit more into the hyperactivity or impulsivity category. It seems that most people experience the combined type of ADHD. So inattention, we're looking at lack of attention to details or careless mistakes. These especially happen when a person is not very passionate about what they're doing. If it's feeling tedious, if it's feeling boring, that's when careless mistakes are going to happen. Difficulty sustaining attention, specifically for things that there is not a high motivation for. A person might seem not to listen, so they might seem like they're far away. They might seem like they are completely absorbed in something else. They might come across as being insensitive or not personable, and that might be because they're focused on something else, not because they don't care about what you're saying. Not following instructions easily. I know that some people with ADHD really struggle with authority, and that can sometimes feel partly because it can be difficult to keep track of all of the different parts of an instruction, but also people with ADHD might resist an authority that they don't quite understand. So people with ADHD are not the types to just listen to whatever is told to them just because. They are the types to want to understand the logic and the reasoning behind an instruction, behind an order. Difficulty organizing tasks and activities. We know that people with ADHD can sometimes have limitations in the frontal lobe. We're talking about executive functioning, and these are all of the things that you can think of them as the most adult part of your brain. All of the things that you need for adulting sit right here in the prefrontal cortex, and people with ADHD might struggle with being able to organize and categorize things, mostly because there's too many stimuli. There's too many stimuli to be able to really find that sense of kind of harmony amongst everything that's coming into the brain. Avoiding sustained mental effort, losing and misplacing objects, feeling easily distracted, forgetful in daily activities. On the hyperactivity and impulsivity side, we see fidgetiness. That can really be a feeling of restlessness, not really knowing how to sit still, not really knowing how to, just be sitting quietly, peacefully. Leaving your seat frequently, running about, feeling restless, excessively loud or noisy. That's how they might come across to other people. Always on the go, so always something else to think about, always something else to attend to. Talking excessively, Talking excessively is another interesting one that comes from executive functioning. So our ability to inhibit ourselves, our ability to not swear in church is the classic example that's given, comes from the executive functioning that happens in the prefrontal cortex. So talking excessively might come straight out of what's happening in the prefrontal cortex. Blurting out answers, same thing. Difficulty with waiting his or her turn, and tending to act without thinking. Now, all of these symptoms can be explained by what's happening in the prefrontal cortex. I heard a beautiful analogy of how we can understand that given by Andrew Huberman, who does the podcast, The Huberman Lab. So what he says is that we can imagine that people with ADHD don't have the kind of conductor that can bring together a harmony, a symphony in the way that other people can. For people with ADHD, the conductor might not be loud enough for the entire orchestra to hear what needs to be happen for there to be harmony happening in the mental processes. Or it can be that the conductor is not giving direction in a way that the orchestra can understand. So what we see with people with ADHD is that they are often trying to find that harmony, trying to find that sense in which the orchestra comes together in a symphony. But because they are not taught how to do this, because in schools there's very little attention given to someone who has these kinds of traits, that ends up causing huge amounts of anxiety, huge amounts of self-doubt, feeling isolated from others. All of the secondary things that I mentioned that people with ADHD might be struggling with, depression, anxiety, substance use, come from the frustration, the pain, the discomfort and distress that is happening because this orchestra is not playing in its symphony. Luckily, there are a few things that we can do to try and encourage that symphony to be playing. So if we think about how ADHD is framed currently, the way in which it is presented in the DSM, which is as a disorder, an illness, something to be treated medically, something to be fixed, and also the way that we still talk about ADHD, the way that the way that we explain the symptoms, it's very much a problem-focused framing of what we're talking about. It is zoning in on the weaknesses, the limitations, and it is turning those things into the thing that needs to be fixed. So there's a book that's been released. It's called ADHD 2.0, written by Ned Hallowell and John Ratey. And this is a new take on ADHD. Interestingly, ADHD, before it was called ADHD, before it was called ADD, it was called clumsy child syndrome. It was also called a deficit of moral character. It was called a hyperkinetic impulse disorder. What we can take from that is that just because of the way that ADHD has been framed in society and the way that ADHD has been spoken about for decades is not correct. It's not accurate. We are still developing our understanding. We're still developing the research. We are still, I think, as a species, developing our own self-awareness about how our psychology functions. So what we can take from that is that the way that ADHD is currently spoken about does not have to be the factual way that we understand ADHD. As I said at the beginning, I don't think that there are many absolutes in psychology. And it's very clear to me that when it comes to ADHD, we still have to develop our understanding. So in ADHD 2.0, what is presented is the idea that the DSM categorization of ADHD is not enough. It's too vague. It doesn't capture the experiences of everybody who have these challenges. And very importantly, the DSM doesn't at all talk about the strengths that come with having an ADHD brain. So in this book, Hallowell and Rati are really presenting a completely different side of ADHD. And they start by offering us a different name for it. So instead of calling it attention deficit and hyperactivity disorder, what they are suggesting is that we start calling it VAST, variable attention stimulus trait. And we can pick apart what they mean with this term. The first word that they give us is variable. And what they argue is that in ADHD, there is not just a deficit. It's not that people with ADHD only have a limitation with their attention. Sometimes there is a deficit of attention, but sometimes it feels like there's too much attention. And of course, there's everything in between. So what they are suggesting, firstly, is that there is an attention dysregulation. It's not a deficit. It's not only a limit. It is a dysregulation, and it is something that if you learn to find the things that regulate you, and if you learn to kind of ride the wave of your attention variations, so to speak, that's when you can find your potential. That's when you can start feeling like you are in control of what's happening for you. Of course, we have the attention part. Attention is really the gateway between the outside world and our internal world. So I think the other problem with the term ADHD, the attention deficit and hyperactivity disorder, is that it also comes with this idea that if you can just nail down the attention, then the person will be fine again, the person will be normal again. And this is completely inaccurate, because our attention is only our gateway. And everything that's happening on the outside and everything that's happening on the inside, if that is mediated by our attention, it means that everything is affected. It means that you as a whole person will be affected or shaped or challenged by what's happening with your attention. And it is not just a symptom that can be medicated and then cool, you don't have to think about it anymore. The stimulus part of this term is really important, because again, it's about the things that people with ADHD find stimulating compared with some other people. People with ADHD sometimes crave more intense stimulation at times, and then they might crave almost no stimulation at other times. And that is, of course, because they're experiencing that stimulation in a different way to people who do not have ADHD. People with ADHD might experience stimulation in a way that means that sometimes it drives them and it lights them on fire and it brings them the kind of passion that other people might never experience. But it might also mean that at times it feels completely overwhelming, completely kind of all-encompassing. And so that's when people with ADHD might need to kind of close the curtains and spend 24 hours in complete silence, so that they can kind of recover themselves. And I think possibly my favorite part of this term is the word trait. What they are suggesting with this word trait is that we don't have to call it a disorder for us to pay attention to it, for us to take it seriously. We also don't have to call it a disorder in order to understand it. When we start calling it a trait, we can start kind of popping out of that, the assumption that we have of it being a bad thing, a disorder, something to be medicated. We can pop out of that and start thinking about it as another trait. All humans have lots of traits that create the tapestry of their personality. And so if we start thinking about this thing as a trait, it means we can start relating to it in a way that is much more effective, much more sustainable, and ultimately, I think, much more satisfying for a person who has ADHD. So I really loved this infographic that I found, talking about how two things, how one part of ADHD can be viewed from very different perspectives. So what we see here, they say vast traits can be leveraged for success. We see a lot of creativity in people with ADHD, a lot of innovation, a lot of the kind of tenacity to stick with a problem until it's solved, that someone with ADHD might not have. They might not have that sticking power. You could see these things as impairments. You could see these things as limitations. And I think especially if you yourself, if you have ADHD and you are looking at these things as impairments, then yes, they will be. You have defined them as such. Not your fault, because it's been drilled into you that this is a problem and it makes you, I don't know, learning deficient or whatever horrible messages have been sent. But this kind of information is your opportunity to start looking at whether you agree with how ADHD has been taught to you. Curiosity, hyper-focusing, original thinking. What Hallowell and Ratey argue is that probably people like Einstein, people like Van Gogh, Steve Jobs, most probably experienced this variable attention stimulus trait. And in that way, we can think that we actually really need ADHD. We need the kind of curiosity, hyper-focusing, original thinking, overthinking that sometimes comes with ADHD, in order to make progress as a human species. It is entirely possible that the kind of imaginative creativity, the innovation that can come out of ADHD is behind some of the leaps of progress that we've made. And I've actually heard that argument being made about the psychotic syndromes as well, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia. It's possible that we all need a little bit of insanity to break the mold, to be moving forward in our human evolution. And this, I don't know, this might seem like making a really grand kind of link here, but to me, it's really, really important. I think that people who have experienced mental illness, who have experienced any kind of difficult diagnosis, it comes with so much self-doubt, self-criticism, isolation, misunderstandings between you and other people. And if we were to think about these things differently, as not terrible, horrible, frightening things to be avoided at all costs, but things to be cared about and nurtured, then I think it's possible that we as humans could have turned out a little bit differently. But let's get back to it. So the opposite side of that coin would be labeling yourself or someone else with ADHD as distractible, having a lack of focus, being irrational. People with the vast experience might be more able to be spontaneous, open to new ideas, courageous, willing to take risks, willing to jump in, willing to be candid, direct. But then, of course, we could see these things as impulsive, overcommitting, foolhardy, lack of follow through, interrupting, blunt. What we can see is either appreciating the energy that comes with ADHD, or focusing on the hyperactivity that is difficult to tame. I think it's very important to really kind of consider how are our perceptions kind of prophesying how things are going to turn out for us. And if we can examine our perceptions of what we think about something, we can often find that there are a lot more options than we thought beforehand. So as I said, with most psychological phenomena, we also can't take this as fact. To me, this is a very interesting, intriguing hypothesis, but we can still, it's very, very early on, and it's still going to be many years before this is accepted into something like the DSM. We'll see what happens. But for me, it really just it gives an opportunity for examining, for getting curious, for thinking about these things from different angles, and really finding the ways in which you can kind of get a grip for it for yourself, the ways in which you can take these things into your own life, and really, as I said before, kind of ride the wave, instead of feeling like you are just overwhelmed by it over and over again. We know that there are increasing rates of ADHD. We know that there are increasing rates of autism spectrum disorder, other mental illnesses like major depressive disorder. And so for me, what's really, really important about that is that neurodiversity, which is the term used for anyone who doesn't think that they have the typical human experience. Don't know if that exists, but neurodiversity is something that I think we are getting used to. We are talking more about. We've definitely never spoken about neurodiversity as much as we're talking about it now. And I think really we as a society are going to sit with the challenge of embracing neurodiversity in a way that didn't happen in the previous generations. I'm quite interested to see what's going to happen next. So I think, you know, especially for people with ADHD, when there is so much information that's kind of bursting out of the seams of TikTok, so much information that's available on YouTube. Sometimes this information conflicts, is paradoxical and very, very confusing. And especially for people with ADHD who tend to kind of go into things as deeply as they really want to, as deeply as they will find satisfying. So my best recommendation when it comes to sifting through all of this information is to, as I said, stay open, but to keep researching, keep listening to what's being found out. Experiment in yourself, try different things. You are your best source of information. So if you try something and it feels horrible and awful and uncomfortable, then that's really, really good information for you. And if you try something and it fits and it feels good and it feels like it's facilitating something in you, that's really, really good information. And it doesn't matter if what works for you doesn't work for your best friend with ADHD, because everyone with ADHD is as unique as their own symptoms. It definitely means that what works for you might not work for someone else, and what's working for everybody on TikTok might not work for you. Listen to yourself. And this is one of the ways in which mindfulness comes in, but I'll get to that. So across the research, across all of my training in psychology, these are the things that can take the edge off almost any mental difficulty. And often, after all of the diagnostic adventuring and the getting of second and third and fourth opinions, assessments, so on and so on, this is what it comes down to. I think that diet, medications, the different psychotherapeutic treatments, they can all contribute, and they can all sometimes make a life-preserving difference to people. These are hugely important parts of the process. And I think any domain that offers something should be considered, should be explored. Emotionally speaking, though, and coming from a counselor, these are the things that I would want to focus on when we're talking about the adaptation and the adjustment to a life with ADHD, a life with the kind of brain that is not like everybody else's brain. These are the things that can really help to regulate yourself and regulate the kind of painful experience of something like ADHD. So regulation is always good for us. This is as a rule, as a golden rule for humans. We work better with regulation. People with ADHD do better when their stress levels are reduced, when their stress levels come down. It means that there is more space in an already kind of wonky prefrontal cortex to be able to manage things like organization, planning, all of those really boring adulty kind of things. Your relationship with yourself. To me, this is a really big one in ADHD, because kids, especially if you received your diagnosis as a kid, you would then be treated as if there is something different about you, something wrong with you, something that means that you have to try extra hard, if you want to achieve the same stuff that the other kids are achieving. And even if the diagnosis came later, even if there was a general sense of feeling different in some way, feeling like you don't fit onto the conveyor belt of what education sometimes looks like, it can come with a lot of self-criticism, feelings of low self-worth, feeling that you don't know how to contribute in this society, when it just doesn't feel like your brain is operating in the same way that other people's brains seem to operate. I touched on how people with ADHD are vulnerable to things like major depressive disorder and substance use, and these come from the kind of degraded sense of self that can come with the diagnostic label like ADHD. So to me, working on your relationship with yourself is an extremely important part of learning to possibly one day even enjoy what an ADHD brain can do. Adaptability is extremely important, because especially our Western upper class world is kind of constructed for the typical experience, the average experience. It means that people who have a neurodiverse experience, they're going to have to find different ways of doing the same things. They're going to have to find different ways of achieving, for example, something like a salary, whereas some people have the ability to get to work by 9 o'clock and do what is asked of them, and kind of just focus and get the job done. People with ADHD might not be able to earn money in that way, because everything about that setup is wrong for a person with ADHD. And so for them, the adaptability comes in being able to achieve what you need to achieve, what you want to achieve, but in a way that is in sync with what's happening with your brain. And then very importantly is perseverance. As we're talking about, because the world is or our middle class Western world is set up in a way that doesn't encourage neurodiversity. It means that someone experiencing neurodiversity is really going to have to stick to and work through and I suppose find resilience that people who are neurotypical might not ever have to practice. So this is where mindfulness can step in. This is where mindfulness can support all of the things that can really help a person to find fulfillment and joy, even if their ADHD brain has kind of made that challenging before. So mindfulness, some people here might be very familiar with it. Some people here might be quite new to it, and everything in between. It's definitely become a buzzword, right? It's definitely become something that's very on trend, very on topic. And I think for some people, it feels naturally intriguing. It feels interesting and something that might help them. For some people, it might feel wishy-washy. And for some people, it might feel like, you know, how on earth is being mindful going to solve my problems? And the answer is, frankly, it can't solve any of your problems, but it can change the way in which you solve your problems. So I love this little cartoon. It's been around for a few years now, so I couldn't even get an accurate source for it. But it has this lovely idea. What I love most about this picture is that, so if we imagine this lady as she's walking through the park, and if she was not able to be mindful about this experience in nature, then this experience in nature would not be able to give her the kind of therapeutic benefits that nature can actually give to us. What I mean to say is that mindfulness can help us to also be more open to the things that are therapeutic to us. Nature is very therapeutic, but if you're in nature and you're thinking about everything else, it's not going to be able to have that effect. So what is mindfulness? We are talking about the practice of paying attention on purpose and without judgment to the present moment. To me, this is very much about not burning up energy, analyzing the past or catastrophizing about the future. It is not living in the what if, but living in the real. It's being available to the moments that can nurture and energize you, while keeping your mind from, instead of keeping your mind from being never where you are. To me, this is where our power is. Our power is in the present moment. And whenever we're struggling with feelings of powerlessness, we can ask ourselves, but what are we trying to exert power over? Is it the past? Is it the future? Because, yeah, we don't have any power there. I really like thinking of mindfulness just as brain gym. To me, it's really logical. It's about learning to choose when to focus and when to let go, learning to be intentional with your thoughts. It's thinking in a more efficient way. I really like the idea of mindfulness being about learning to be human. our own mindfulness can teach us how to manage our emotions and our unique traits so that they can contribute to our lives, instead of spending our lives listing all of the ways that we're different to people and how we should be ashamed of that. This is really our relationship with ourselves. It is learning how to, instead of being cruel and punishing with our experiences, learning how to be on our own side. I think that we don't often know what to do with emotions other than repressing them, other than avoiding them. That's what we've been taught: repression, avoidance, deflection, substance use. So it's really about learning a new way of being with your emotions. Excuse me. Mindfulness can teach you how to experience your emotions without letting them take over, which is, I think, the kind of fear that some people sit with, that if they open up that box, then it's just going to explode everywhere. And we definitely don't want that. That would be a very painful thing to go through. We want regulation in the emotional experience. We want to be able to attend to the emotions and not try to repress them. I've recently started thinking about our emotional experience as being as foundational to our lives as something like your heart rate, your breathing rhythms, whatever's happening with your immune system. Our emotions, to me, are as real and as constant. They are there in the background. And if we start thinking about, the idea of trying to repress your breathing rhythm or trying to repress your heart rate, that's absurd, right? But that is what we do with our emotions. Another really beautiful thing that's been happening, that's been giving us a lot of information about how mindfulness works, is that the neuroscientific evidence has now caught up with thousands of years of practices and philosophies and theories that have been honed and whittled by many people over lots of time. Because these practices and philosophies are so old, to me that says, okay, cool. I mean, that must be getting closer to truth than, some of the things that we think that we know, that are based on, just a few decades of scientific research. But really what we're seeing now is that the neuroscientific evidence, now that we have the capabilities to look at the brain in more particular ways, we are seeing in brain scans how mindfulness works. We are seeing how mindfulness can regulate neural patterns, neural thought processes that are happening. We can see how mindfulness can increase areas of the brain that are associated with more of that adult kind of thinking that we were talking about. Shrinking inflammation. We're really seeing the physical effects. And what I was very excited about is my brother-in-law sent through an article in The Guardian. Some research has just stated that a mindfulness-based psychotherapeutic program was more effective than a cognitive behavioral therapy program. And this is very interesting to me and very exciting to me, because I think we're really starting to understand that mindfulness is not a fad. It's not something has been trendy and everybody's going to get over it soon. I think that mindfulness has a pure logic to it that we can definitely at least be open to. So what we've seen in the research is consistently showing that practicing mindfulness is associated with reduced stress levels, emotional regulation, increased feelings of satisfaction, which is something that can escape a person with ADHD, and better executive functioning. We've seen this in the research, and while the research on mindfulness, using mindfulness for ADHD is still young, it seems like everything is kind of aligning in a very promising way. So everybody, the last thing that I just wanted to talk about when it comes to mindfulness is that, of course, people with ADHD, people who are not good at sitting still, might have a greater problem with practicing mindfulness than someone who doesn't struggle with something like impulse control. And what's very important about starting the practice of mindfulness is that people tend to think that what you're supposed to be doing is keeping your mind blank, keeping your mind empty. That's not what you're supposed to be doing. What the effort that is being practiced in a mindfulness practice is, firstly, understanding, accepting that your mind is going to wander. That is going to happen. It is inevitable, and that is how your brain is supposed to function. So not if your mind wanders, but when your mind wanders, the effort in a mindfulness practice is bringing it back. And every time you bring your attention back, you are pushing a little, your brain is doing a deadlift. Every time you bring your attention back to the present moment, to the senses, to the breath, you are popping a mental squat. And so even though it can feel frustrating, even though it can feel difficult, that's where the work is, which is very similar to how we are at the gym, right? Every time we exert that effort, we know that that's what's necessary to achieve the results that we want to achieve. And so for anyone starting the mindfulness practice, I want to encourage that at the beginning, when you feel the discomfort of starting a new skill, persevere through that, push yourself through that gently, kindly, because that is the effort. And as you work through those skills, as you are developing, as you are strengthening the attention muscles, that is when you are going to start seeing effects in the rest of your life. For anyone with ADHD who is starting a mindfulness practice, what I recommend is that you rather start with the mindfulness practices that use your senses as a home base, as an anchor, or the ones that use breath work. Those are the ones that you will find easier to kind of attach your attention to, rather than trying to start with some of the other mindfulness practices, which can be much more unstructured, much more abstract, if I can say it that way. So I just wanted to show you, I'm not going to go through this diagram, but I just wanted to show you this is an example of some of the stuff that's available online. Some of it is a big bag of trash. Some of it is really, really cool and interesting. And this is something that I found looks like it can be very useful. And it seems like it is kind of comprehensive and really gives some good recommendations as to how to deal with that feeling of being paralyzed when you are indecisive. Okay, so the recommendations that I'd like to put forward to anybody who has been diagnosed with ADHD or identifies with these traits. Breathing exercises, also a great way to get into mindfulness. Breathing exercises can help to just soothe your system to a point that you are more able to start engaging with a new skill. There's a beautiful app called Insight Timer. You can pay for some features, but I use the free version. My family members use the free version, and there's definitely enough on there. All kinds of different meditation practices, mindfulness practices, something cool to explore and consider. Make your lists, use your timers, use your reminders, give up on the stuff that you are not good at. If you're not good at remembering appointments, let go of that. Use lists and timers and reminders in a way that you can support yourself in the things that you're not good at, probably the things that you don't want to be good at anyway, so that there is more space in your brain for the things that really light your fire, that bring you that passion, that feeling of flow and creativity. Do your best to learn to observe and use your personal rhythms. And this is exactly where mindfulness can help, because once you are practicing mindfulness and you're getting out of the habit of immediately criticizing yourself for everything, then you can start observing yourself in a way that is more curious, more kind, just gathering information about yourself instead of being cruel and punishing with yourself. And then once you know more about your personal rhythms, you can actually start using those to bring you greater productivity in the areas where you want to be productive, and then really allowing yourself to rest when you need to rest. Realistic expectations are really, really important. And I think I kind of alluded to this when talking about lists, timers, reminders, that as you change your relationship with yourself, so as you stop thinking about ADHD as a bad thing to be kind of tamed and managed as much as possible, you can start opening up to the possibility that the things that you're not good at doesn't matter if you're not good at those things. You don't have to be good at everything. It would be weird if you were good at everything. It would be exhausting if you were good at everything. So if you let go of the things that you are not good at, it means that your expectations for yourself can be more realistic, which also means that they can be more positive. If you're sitting stuck in the negativity about yourself, that's also not realistic. What is realistic is that everybody has some positive and everybody has some negative. And internal validation. I think we are in a society in which we are kind of bred to need external validation from outside, people outside of us telling us you're good enough, you're beautiful enough, you're smart enough, you're worthy enough. And what becomes really, really important in mental health and mental wellness is being able to validate for yourself, I am enough. I have tried my best. I am in pain. I need to rest. I want to try something and I don't know how it's going to turn out, and that's fine for me. The better you can internally validate your pain, your hopes, your dreams, your distress, the more stable a source of validation you will have. Finding validation outside of us is a very, very unreliable source. Inside of us, once we develop that can be something that we really can rely on. So everybody, in terms of the resources that are available to you, I will be offering a course starting on the 25th of April until the 30th of May. It will be 6 2-hour sessions. It's for adults only, and please send me an email if you're interested. It will really be expanding on everything that I've spoken about here. It will really be kind of exploring these things as a group together, getting feedback from different people, getting insight from different people, and really figuring out how to implement what I've spoken about over time. There are, of course, lots of psychiatrists, educational psychologists, even occupational therapists who have specialized in ADHD and so can give very, very good specific information about medications, diets, all of the things that can be explored. And my advice there is just to get multiple opinions. I also found a really cool online magazine called Additude, ADD-Itude. And I've just been testing them out a little bit, and they've been sending me some really, really interesting looking articles. And their website looks really promising to me. So that's definitely something that is possibly something that you can look into. On YouTube, there are some really, really interesting, especially the TED Talks. I like to go for the TED Talks because it means that there is, some kind of research went into it, some kind of substance organization went into it, and it's a nice way of accessing summarized information. In terms of mindfulness in South Africa, a beautiful place to start is the Institute of Mindfulness in South Africa. That's their website there. They have a lot of beautiful resources around starting with mindfulness. And also they give lots of beautiful resources about practitioners in South Africa who can help you with practicing mindfulness. And then my go-to is always John Kabat-Zinn. He is the person who really brought mindfulness into psychology, and he's an amazing speaker, an amazing philosopher, really, I think, and he's a beautiful source for looking into mindfulness. I just wanted to credit these cool slides that I used, a nice resource for anyone online, and that is the information that I have for you, everybody. We're a little bit over time, so if anyone does have to leave, that's completely understandable. If there are any questions.
Hi Mia, it's Carmen here. How are you?
Good, thanks. How are you, Carmen?
Good, thank you. I just wanted to say thank you very much for this evening. It was very insightful. I did try and concentrate as much as possible as was allowed. I'm just curious if you could. I've just jumped onto your website to have a look at the course that the courses that you're offering. Do I just drop a message onto your website, or can we just drop you a mail?
Yes, yeah. So apologies, I still need to just update the details onto my website, but you can just send me an email, counseling@miapinard.coza, and then I'll give you all the details.
Thank you. Thanks.
Perhaps you just want to pop that in the chat, Mia, with the spelling
Yes,
and everything.
sure.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah, any other questions? I see Michael's got his hand up there. Michael?
Yes, thank you very much. My question is around the idea of like task orientation and internal validation, where it feels for myself a lot of validation comes from the ability to complete tasks, and that is not always the easiest thing to manage. And finding like a well to pull from, if I can call it that, for internal validation when I'm struggling to complete tasks is it feels like a leap to make. It feels like a difficult thing. Are there tips for using mindfulness in that, or like those mental squats you talked about, where it can be helpful with that?
I think that there can be internal validation around the parts of the process that are not just the task completion. And I think that sometimes we need to learn to validate for ourselves that just planning out the task, that is something that you can, pat yourself on the back for. Just preparing yourself for the task, that can be something that you can pat yourself on the back for. Just thinking about when you are engaged in the task, sort of reorienting yourself from the task completion to all of the kind of mental muscle work that you are doing as you're working on the task. I think that we need to kind of detach from only being able to proud of ourselves and validate for ourselves once the task is done. And we need to kind of cheerlead for ourselves much earlier than that.
Lovely, lovely, lovely. You're right. Yeah, for sure, for sure. I think it's something that can come with practice. Like you said, with the actual act of mindfulness itself being something you practice. Practicing the cheerleading is a nice word for it. I think can definitely be done. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure. Thanks, Michael.
Anne?
Yeah, thanks, Mel.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic discussion, and I very much like the idea of reframing ADHD as vast. I think, anything framed negatively obviously has a negative impact, and the consequences of that can be quite messy, I think. I further want to ask you though, so why are there theories out there as to why there is more sort of diagnosis these days of, and I'm going to use the ADHD and autism and probably a number of other, let's say, mental, I don't know what the right word is, disorders, for want of a better word, nowadays than ever before. What are your theories and ideas?
There's a bunch of research trying to understand this phenomenon. I think it's probably when it comes to humans, because we're so complex, I think it's probably a matter of different things contributing. So I think one thing is simply that as awareness about these things grow, reporting increases. So more people are likely to go and seek a diagnosis, and diagnoses are more likely to be given. That's the one thing. The second thing is that I think that the type of society that we're living in comes with a lot of pressure, a lot of distress. There was a movement in the 70s called the anti-psychiatry movement that was saying that everybody who says that there's only something wrong with the people who say they're sane, because they said that in the kind of world that we live in, with so much pain and suffering and exploitation and all kinds of horrible things, you would be, if you're sane in that kind of society, then there's something wrong with you. So I think that being as we grow more aware of our suffering, as we grow more aware of others' suffering through things like social media and the news and so on, our mental distress increases. There's theories about toxicities. I know that rates of autism are higher, significantly higher in Gauteng. And I must admit, I don't know much about the research, but a link was made between the mine dumps in Gauteng and our higher rates of autism spectrum disorder. So I think it's probably quite a few things that are contributing to these higher rates of diagnosed mental illness. And I think that I hope that this is actually going to create the necessity of being more accepting, more caring, more nurturing with mental illness.
Thanks, Mia.
Wonderful. I see comments popped something in the chat about a lovely book. Does it? Yeah, that's so just maybe if everyone can have a look at that. Any other? I think Peter N, did you?
Yeah.
You've got your hand up, right?
Yeah, I did. I'd just like to say hi to Mia and say how wonderful it is to see you and hear what you've got to say. Very, very interesting. And as she knows, Victor and myself are parents of a child with ADHD. And I must say, I am going to try and use this acronym VAST. I find it incredibly beneficial and sort of mind opening for us to view our boy in that way. You know, he's now 25, and it's very hard to know where to intervene, but it really does help to have a much more positive view of his attributes and not see everything as a sort of a disease state that is broken, you know. So I think that was sort of just saying how amazingly useful that is. And, you know, as parents, you're always sort of sitting by wanting to intervene, wanting to do things. And particularly if, like me, you're much more logical and sort of, you know, from 1 to 10 goes, you know, very logically. And to allow that and to see how he makes his way, you know. But we've had to sort of bring him back to live at home with us in his own place outside, just to be able to provide a bit more structure for a while, you know.
Yeah. And I can only imagine how scary it is as a parent, not knowing how the situation is going to turn out, not knowing, you know, whether this is going to get steadily worse and worse and worse, or if there's going to be a break in the clouds. But I think that changing the mindset, changing the framing is more soothing and comforting for everybody involved, for the whole family, when you're kind of resetting yourself to really take stock of the positive. I think that can be encouraging and calming for everybody.
Yeah. And then just to add on, you know, just in terms of looking at possible causes of, you know, ADHD and the number of ADHD people, or vast people, I should say. What do you think of Gabor Mate and his view that it is from sort of basically caused by a childhood trauma and a response to the trauma that they've experienced?
I think, I mean, Gabor Mate is a very you know, his theories and what he's putting forward are very well researched. That's one thing. Another thing is that it is becoming clear how I suppose how severely trauma can shape a system. We really are beginning to understand how trauma can shape the nervous system in a way that kind of sets it on a completely different track. And we're only really starting to understand exactly the ways in which trauma can affect us. So I think it's definitely something to consider. It's definitely something to keep in mind. What I love about the mindfulness perspective is that if you're engaging with mindfulness, you will be working on the traumatized nervous system at the same time as whatever else you want to accomplish. Something like mindfulness is going to be soothing and treating the nervous system in a way that, if trauma is something that has contributed to the development of the ADHD, then you're working on that.
Okay, that's nice to hear.
Okay,
thanks very much.
Thank you. Anne?
Thanks. And just building on that, so given that, you know, in the old days, they used to think, you know, the neural networks formed, etc. So given that we now understand that we have a lot of plasticity and all of that, so neural pathways can regrow and basically change their way. I'm almost kind of, yeah, trying to tie in what you saying with the mindfulness and any type of those practices as possibly ways of rebuilding or changing the neural pathways. Is
Yeah.
that kind of some of the thinking behind it?
Absolutely. I mean, mindfulness works on the system in multiple different ways. But one thing that has been shown in the research is that in environments where neuroplasticity is really, really important. So, for example, with survivors of brain injury, when survivors of brain injury are practicing mindfulness, then that seems to happen alongside the neuroplasticity that is required for them to be able to recover from a brain injury. So yeah, there's definitely links there. And for me, it's also just kind of the logic that your brain can only be open to learning. It can only be in a state in which it can learn if your stress levels are reduced. It's not possible for a stressed system to now be able to prioritize the skills that are needed for learning. Two different systems.
Thanks. Thank you.
So I think, Mark, I think we can close up the meeting.
Okay, Mia. Yeah, thank you. I mean, it was absolutely wonderful. I've heard your 30-minute presentation, and now it's just been really unpacking it. And please, everyone, just really for your benefit, share the word. Let everyone know that Mia is going to be running this program, which is going to be immensely beneficial. And I would love to see the outcome of that, Mia. So well done for tonight, and thank you for your time. It's been exceptional.
Fabulous. Thank you so much, Mark, for hosting me, and thanks to everybody who could be here. It's been wonderful presenting to you.
Thanks, Mia. Bye.
Take care.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you. Thanks for your engagement and
Bye.
beautiful questions. Thank you. Good night, everyone.
Good night.